That evening, Michael Jordan was invited to a prestigious gala in Paris. He was only supposed to say a few formal words, present an award, smile for the cameras, and leave. But something shifted at the last moment. Perhaps it was the images of the bombed hospital in Gaza. Perhaps it was the deaths in Iran just hours earlier. Or maybe it was a silent breaking point that no one saw coming. Jordan took the microphone, and in less than 2 minutes, he left the entire room stunned. What he said didn't please everyone, and by the next day, some were already letting him know he should apologize. But what would soon become clear is this. Michael Jordan doesn't speak often, but when he does, he never backs down. Paris, the Salle Pleyel, a building lit up in blue and white. Inside, a carefully selected crowd, artists, doctors, journalists, even a few ministers. The evening was elegant, almost hushed. The talk was of dialogue, peace, and commitment to humanity. Jordan was there, in a dark jacket, his face serious. He was invited to present an award to a humanitarian organization working in the Mediterranean. He'd been warned. Tonight wasn't the night to make waves, not the time to talk geopolitics, just to honor those working for unity. But in the corridors, eyes met, because everyone knew tragedies had just unfolded. Hours earlier, Israel had launched a major military operation against facilities in Iran, leaving dozens dead. Images were looping on social media, but barely mentioned on television. And in Gaza, once again, a children's hospital had been hit. Civilians, the wounded, medical staff, toys scattered in blood-stained corridors. No one wanted to talk about it tonight. Too sensitive, too political. Jordan stayed silent, listening, greeting, hands in his pockets. He hadn't planned to speak, just present the trophy, pose for the photo, and go home. But when his moment came, something changed. He walked slowly onto the stage. The room applauded, relaxed, expecting a smile, a few words of thanks, a table in the background. But Jordan took the microphone, held it gently, looked at the audience, and spoke. Tonight, we talk about peace, but we mostly talk about peace where it doesn't bother anyone. The words landed, calm but sharp, sending a shiver through the room. I'm always told not to speak too much, to stay in my place. But when a hospital in Gaza is bombed, when Iran is struck in the middle of the night, are we still talking about peace? He didn't shout, didn't waver. He looked out and spoke as if breathing. I didn't grow up in silence. I know what it costs. And he finished, without hate, without naming anyone. Peace isn't a word. It's not a gala theme. It's what we do when it truly matters. A silence fell. No sound. A few hesitant claps. Then louder. Then a murmur spread through the room. Some stayed seated. Others stood. But in the corridors, as soon as he stepped off the stage, phones lit up, glances shifted. People approached, whispering politely but firmly, "You went too far." And that was just the beginning. The next morning, the newspapers barely mentioned his speech, at least not in the headlines. Le Figaro praised a successful evening for dialogue. Liberation highlighted a singer who performed for Ukraine. News channels aired a blurry clip of Jordan's speech, just a few seconds, never the end. But on social media, the full video, filmed shakily from the stands, spread. Every word was clear, especially the silence that followed. It was ordinary people, not the media, who turned up the heat. Within hours, his phrase went viral. Tonight, we talk about peace where it doesn't bother anyone. On Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, everywhere. Comments poured in. Some hailed his courage, others called it a dangerous stance, and some, more discreetly, worried about a beloved figure stepping out of line. That's when it began. Jordan received no official calls, no statements, no summons. But voices rose around him, well-placed contacts, friends in sports, media, politics. They didn't threaten, they advised. It'd be good to clarify, they said. Say you spoke generally, that you didn't target anyone, that you didn't know it was so sensitive. Even longtime friends called, not to lecture, just to warn, it's heated. Some ministers didn't like it. The timing's bad. In the corridors of power, no one stirred openly. They watched, waited for a post, a small gesture, a poorly worded apology to erase what he'd said. But Jordan stayed silent. He posted nothing, retracted nothing. And that silence disturbed the most. He declined interview requests, not out of arrogance, but principle. He'd spoken. He wouldn't play the game of commenting on his own words. Then a well-connected journalist from Le Monde published an op-ed. Not an investigation, not an editorial, just a single line at the end of a sober piece. According to a source close to Jordan, he will never apologize for saying what he thinks, and especially not for telling the truth. That line, endlessly shared, shifted the debate. It confirmed what many feared. Jordan wouldn't fall in line. 3 days after the gala, the matter turned political. Officially, no one named Jordan. No minister mentioned him directly. But behind closed doors, instructions were given. TV panels featured the same profiles, the same talking points, diplomacy experts, crisis communication specialists. They said public figures must watch their words, that the situation was complex, that it wasn't a basketball player's role to comment on international tragedies. A former ambassador even remarked on a news channel, "When you're a figure loved across the Arab world, you have a responsibility not to stoke tensions." In some articles, they stopped naming Jordan, referring to him indirectly. A sports figure who recently spoke on the Middle East situation, a personality whose remarks were deemed ambiguous. But everyone knew, and behind those cautious words, a line was being drawn. Sponsors grew nervous. Some asked to distance themselves from any personal stances. A clothing brand postponed a long-planned campaign, officially for scheduling reasons, unofficially to see which way the wind would blow. On a major radio show, a commentator mentioned the activist temptation of former champions, joking that Jordan should stick to talking about basketball, not bombs. But what stood out was his absence of response. Jordan didn't speak, didn't tweet, didn't react. He focused on his family, his charitable work, his life, ignoring the storm around him. The longer his silence lasted, the more it unsettled. It became clear this wasn't a mistake or oversight. It was a choice. He'd said what he needed to say, and he wouldn't take it back. A journalist who'd been at the gala, an independent, published an article describing that precise moment when Jordan dropped the line about peace that doesn't bother anyone. She wrote, "It wasn't a speech. It was a line in the sand, and those who heard it know which side they want to stand on." The piece was shared thousands of times, and slowly, a divide emerged between those who said he went too far and those who wondered why so many wanted to stop him from speaking about bomb children. Then came a letter in a plain white envelope. No logo, no official address. It was delivered to the foundation Jordan had supported for years. Nothing urgent, no flag, no official stamp, but inside, a few handwritten lines. It was from a woman, a mother, living in Marseille for over 20 years, born in Tehran. Her son, Mehdi, was 12. He'd been killed in an Israeli strike on a hospital 2 days before the gala. She didn't ask for anything, didn't insult anyone, didn't write in anger. She simply said her son loved Jordan, mimicked his moves in the living room, knew his games with the Bulls by heart. In a simple sentence, she added, "He believed you never gave up on kids." At the end, she included a photo, a boy with a wide smile, in an oversized Team USA jersey, holding a worn basketball. When Jordan read the letter, he said nothing. He sat for a long time, staring at the photo, then left the room. He didn't speak to anyone all day. The next day, he took a train to Marseille. No cameras, no statements. He arrived alone, unannounced, the letter in his pocket. He asked the foundation for the address. They hesitated, then gave it to him. He rang the bell. The mother opened the door. She didn't scream, didn't collapse, she froze. Jordan stood there, simple, dignified, eyes lowered. He didn't make grand speeches. He just said he'd read her letter, that he was sorry, and that he wanted to return the photo in person. She told him the photo was for him. He didn't stay long, 10 minutes at most. But in that quiet room, something happened. A hand on a shoulder, a look, a silent promise to remember. As he left, he placed a note on the table. For Mehdi, and for all the other children whose names no one says. That evening, the mother didn't speak to the media, but someone, a neighbor perhaps, posted a blurry image online. Jordan standing in front of a modest building, hands in his pockets, gaze distant. It spread across the internet. No captions, no slogans, just a silent man who refused to forget. Suddenly, it wasn't just politics or controversy anymore. It was a story, the story of a child. In certain offices in Paris, the mood shifted. It was no longer just a matter of communication. Meetings were held, emails exchanged, internal memos circulated with vague titles like Managing Sensitive Personalities. Jordan wasn't named, but everyone knew. He'd become inconvenient. They noted his influence in the suburbs, the Arab world, sports circles, his ability to speak without a filter, without a political party, but with a power no one dared confront publicly. He wasn't an activist, a politician, or a soldier. He was Michael Jordan, and that was exactly what made him troubling. A ministerial advisor suggested waiting him out, letting him exhaust himself in silence until the news cycle moved on. But another, more cautious, pointed out that his lack of response only strengthened his image as a free man, untouchable. So they searched quietly, old statements, vague passages in books, details about his travels, people he might have associated with. Nothing illegal, just something to recontextualize. But everything was clean. No excesses, no political affiliations, no ties to any group. Jordan remained what he'd always been, discreet, loyal, upright. And that's where the frustration grew. They didn't know how to bring him down. On an evening talk show, a commentator tried a veiled attack, speaking of certain public figures from immigrant backgrounds who never defend the republic when it's under attack. He didn't name Jordan, but no one was fooled. The backlash was swift online. The clip was shared, denounced. Even moderate politicians spoke up, saying you can't exploit a people's pain to smear a man who speaks of peace. And through it all, Jordan stayed silent. But in that silence, a message rang clear. He wasn't afraid, and he wouldn't change a word. One of his former teammates, widely respected, sent a message to Le Monde journalists. You can twist a lot of things, but not Jordan. Days later, an invitation arrived for a major Sunday night talk show. Massive audience, prestigious, sober setting, the kind of place where you go to defend yourself, clarify, soften the edges. The producer promised a respectful format. No trick questions, just a conversation, a moment of calm, a way to restore balance. Jordan's team passed him the invitation. He read it, said nothing, set it aside, and responded with a single line. It's not for me to explain. He didn't raise his voice or slam doors, but he wouldn't play that game. It wasn't a debate or a strategy. He'd spoken from conscience, and he wouldn't sit on a set to apologize for his humanity. The show kept the invitation open for 2 days, then pivoted to another topic. But the effect lingered. Behind the scenes, people began to understand. Jordan wouldn't fit into their usual boxes. He wouldn't do the TV circuit to retract a word. He wouldn't justify himself. He'd just keep living unbowed. A well-known journalist tweeted, "Michael Jordan might be the only American you can't manipulate with the fear of displeasing." The post was shared, commented on, translated into multiple languages. For many, it summed it all up. In working-class neighborhoods, among exiled families, in forgotten villages, in southern cafes, in stadiums, wherever words carry more weight than headlines, Jordan's words still echoed. Not because he took a stance, but because he dared to speak where others stayed silent. In a school in Toulouse, a teacher asked students to write a letter to a public figure who inspired them. Over half chose Jordan. A 12-year-old boy wrote, "He spoke for those no one ever sees, so I see him bigger than the others." A week passed, and the media storm began to shift elsewhere. A crime story, a political crisis, a sports scandal. Slowly, the channels moved on, the columnists found new targets. But in some circles, they kept waiting for a gesture, a word, a sign of retreat. Jordan gave nothing. A close friend said he saw him alone in a quiet cafe one morning, sipping tea, watching people pass by like anyone else. He didn't talk to anyone, just nodded to the occasional passerby with a look. That was all, but his calm said everything. He'd never been one for grand displays or campaigns, and he wouldn't start now. What he truly thought, he never shouted, but those who listened knew. He spoke rarely, but when he did, It was because he couldn't stay silent anymore. A retired journalist from L'Equipe published a touching column, recalling a moment 20 years earlier in a locker room after a friendly game. Off the record, Jordan had told him, "I can miss a shot, but I can't betray what I feel." The words had stuck with him, and now they resonated more than ever. In high-level circles, the matter was shelved, not forgotten but set aside. He hadn't responded, hadn't folded, and everyone understood nothing would change. But that silence became a signal. In schools, mosques, synagogues, churches, his gesture was discussed. In community centers, locker rooms, homes, his name came up, not as a hero or an idol, but as a man who didn't run. A simple basketball player, yes, but one who said bombing a children's hospital isn't peace, and no fame, no career, no pressure should make us forget that. He didn't seek to convince or to win. He just sought to stand tall. One morning, a letter arrived in Madrid, official, sealed, written in English and translated into French. It came from a Middle Eastern country, not a regime, not an army, but an international humanitarian organization based in Lebanon, active in Syria, Jordan, and Iraq. They invited Jordan to visit children in a war victims care center. No cameras, no press, no speeches, just a visit, a handshake, maybe a basketball, and a few smiles if possible. Jordan read the letter several times. He didn't respond immediately, kept it in a drawer, spoke to his wife and no one else. Days later, he called himself and said yes, on one condition. His visit wouldn't be announced anywhere. No photos, no posts. On the day, he took a discreet flight with one member of his foundation. At the site, he was led to a small field hospital. Nothing grand. White walls, ceiling fans, children's drawings on the windows. In a room at the end of a corridor, a dozen children waited. Some had bandages, others missing limbs, but all smiled when they saw him walk in. Not like they were seeing a star, but someone who hadn't forgotten them. Jordan didn't say much. He sat on the floor, played a little, listened a lot. One child asked if he'd ever been afraid. He said yes, that it's normal, but what matters is what you do with fear. Another showed him a drawing, a basketball court amid ruins, with a faceless player in the corner. Jordan asked why the face wasn't drawn. The child replied, "Because it's all the players we've lost, all the big brothers, all the cousins." Jordan stayed silent, looked at the drawing for a long time, then asked if the child wanted him to sign it. The child said, "No, keep it." Before leaving, he gave each child a jersey. Not a team jersey, no number, just a color, a fabric, a symbol. He left as he came, in silence. But in the days that followed, without anyone announcing it, a blurry photo surfaced, taken from afar. It showed a man sitting on the ground, surrounded by children, no faces recognizable, just a presence, a silhouette, a truth no one could erase. Weeks later, Jordan was invited to a conference in Lyon on sports and social engagement. He accepted, on the condition that he not be the focus. No grand introductions, no banners with his name. He wanted to listen, observe, and speak only if needed. The room was full. Young people, educators, former athletes, volunteers. The atmosphere was calm, far from the media frenzy. They talked about community courts, inequality, respect. No one mentioned the Middle East. No one dared. But after 2 hours, a voice rose from the crowd. An Iranian student, her voice trembling slightly. She didn't ask why Jordan spoke about Gaza or Iran. She didn't talk politics. She simply asked, "How do you keep believing in justice when there's so much silence around the deaths?" The room tensed. The moderator hesitated to move on, but Jordan took the microphone, stood, and looked at the young woman. He didn't contradict or soften her words. He said simply, "I don't know if justice exists, but I know silence kills it a second time." Then he sat down, no more words. The phrase landed like a stone in water. In the silence that followed, something shifted. An educator spoke up, talking about kids, asking questions he didn't dare address. A teacher said her class avoided sensitive topics, even when students begged to discuss them. Suddenly, the conference wasn't surface level anymore. It became real, raw. The masks fell. At the end, no one rushed to congratulate Jordan. No selfies, no formalities, just looks and a sincere thank you from the young woman who, as she left, whispered, "Thank you for not being afraid to be human." That evening, nothing hit the media. No live tweets, no articles. But the next day, in several high schools, teachers projected his words on the board. Silence kills it a second time. And in some places, people began to speak what they had held back. 2 months passed. The news cycle moved on. Other controversies, other headlines. But Jordan's speech kept circulating. Not on TV, not in editorials, but in schools, neighborhoods, community groups, places where words don't die so quickly. He returned home, resumed his work, his foundation, his quiet commitments. He declined more invitations, said no to awards, campaigns, and shows that wanted to reopen the debate. There's no debate, he'd say. It's not a discussion. It's reality. You either face it or you run. One day, while visiting a renovated basketball court in a southern town, a young boy called out, "Mr. Jordan, why don't they like you on TV anymore?" Jordan smiled softly and said, "Because sometimes saying what you think scares people who've forgotten how to think." The boy didn't fully understand, but he smiled too. That day, Jordan gave no speeches. He stayed with the kids, shot hoops, talked with volunteers, sat on the ground. When a teenager handed him a jersey to sign, he wrote, "Never apologize for having a heart." Later, that phrase was framed in a community center. It became a quiet slogan, a guiding line for those moving forward without support. And those who'd hoped to make him bend realized he wouldn't. Not out of stubbornness, but because he knew his worth. And the worth of those erased, bombed, buried without names. Jordan didn't change the world, but he refused to pretend. And sometimes, that's all we needed from him.